Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Good morning, everybody. Wow, man. How you doing? It is Wednesday, November 29th, 2017. A lot going on as we speak. It's been a busy morning. The president is doing his usual idiotic tweeting. Anyway, if not, I guess it's sort of a rage tweeting thing. He's not in a personal rage, but he's on quite a tear this morning from the Golden Throne in the White House. I assume he had one installed there. Otherwise, he simply would not feel comfortable, and you know he is a creature of habit. I guess what everybody's talking about this morning is, well, among other things, man, I mean, like I said, there's so many things happening. Okay, Matt Lauer got fired from the Today Show. That was announced this morning, I think while they were on the air, fired for inappropriate workplace behavior, which I assume is in reference to some sort of sexual harassment. And I really don't know the backstory on it. I don't want to avoid it by any means. I just don't know anything about the Today Show or Matt Lauer. I just don't watch that stuff. I've never been a fan or really a detractor one way or the other of Matt Lauer. I never thought he was fantastic at anything. But, you know, I feel this way about everybody. Everybody who gets dumped from public life, or who dies for that matter, as a revered figure. I always say, I didn't really know the guy. And I didn't. I just don't get attached that way. Anyway, we'll find out about, I guess, how terrible Matt Lauer really was in the coming hours or days, depending on whether or not we spend any actual time on this today during the show. The president is retweeting a lunatic from an organization called Britain First, which, I mean, really gives away the game. But even British people will tell you they're loons. British right-wing people will tell you they're loons. In fact, InfoWars people are telling you this morning that they are loons. And he's retweeting this woman's videos, which are, you know, it's essentially the things you find at the bottom of a web page, you know, the ads from Taboola or something. Like you'll get a video, you know, what Honey Boo Boo's mom looks like now is shocking, except these are anti-Muslim versions. They find a video, who knows what the hell is in it, but one person punches another and maybe the guy has a beard. So the guy who has the beard is a Muslim, or the one who has dark hair is a Muslim. I mean, I didn't watch the videos. They're sensationalist garbage and everybody knows it except the president of the United States. So everybody's in utter shock today that he's a complete whack job. But of course you and I already knew that. And what we're learning this morning, I guess, is that there are still people out there who needed to wake up to the fact that the president is a gullible, deluded imbecile who basically, you know, he lives in, instead of living in his mom's basement, he lives in a gilded tomb at the top of Trump Tower, or now, of course, in the White House. Thank God for our free government type, you know, our liberty and our ability to vote for deluded morons like this guy. Do we now understand finally, like, what he was talking about when he was saying, I swear, you know, he's promising us he saw thousands of Muslims dancing on the rooftops of Jersey City, New Jersey on 9/11. Where does he see such things? Not with his eyes, of course, but rather, you know, not personally. He's not eyewitnessing these things. I imagine, reptilian scumbag that he is, he still uses his eyes as his chief, you know, visual sensory organs. But he's taking in BS videos from the internet and thinking that they're real things and that they're real news. And I actually saw it, and it's very sad and it's very dangerous. He's mentally ill, needs to be removed from office for the good of the entire world. Like, the planet could perish under this ridiculous, moronic idiot who's in charge of enough nuclear weaponry to destroy everything there is or ever was. But, you know, but I saw it on my computer, so therefore blah, blah, blah. And man, a million points to be made, including the point made by, I think, Jesse Burney retweeting it this morning. This should be also, among other things, remind you that the tenure of John Kelly as White House Chief of Staff is an utter failure. You can picture maybe if anybody's wears the pants in that building at all, you should be able to visualize them grabbing the phone out of his hands and slapping the back of his stubby little fingers. Bad president. Don't do that again. No more telephone for you. It's like having a toddler running around punching buttons and screaming things. He's a complete idiot. And, you can't advocate for such things, of course, in our country, but you could leave it up to fate. God, please terminate this man's life. Take him away from us already. I'm sick of it. You're sick of it. Whatever. We leave it to fate. We don't act on our own in this country, but okay. That's where we are. We really need this guy to drop dead already from his giant bloated heart. And couldn't he just, you want to throw a sop to him? Let him die golfing. He died doing what he loved. We'll have a state funeral. La-di-da. He's a big hero. He's dead. All right. We can hope for that. But so far, they keep giving him doctors. I'm not really certain why that's happening and why any doctor, you want to do no harm, let him die. Okay? Thank you. Greg, you might want to give a decent interval before coming on the show after my remarks like that. But this guy is the worst person in the world. And, of course, by the way, he's tweet gloating over the dismissal of Matt Lauer, which, ordinarily you could say almost anybody would be entitled to do such a thing. But Donald Trump, champion of those who have no self-awareness whatsoever. And that's, what can I tell you? That's where we are now. He's got no idea that he's caught up in this thing. Yesterday was sort of a watershed in terms of mainstream type publications finally printing stories and headlines, acknowledging at last, I guess, that we might be talking about a delusional person purporting anyway to be president of the United States. And, somebody tweeted to me this morning, it's like a cartoon character. The guy should have a big, Napoleon hat with an N on it and in a straitjacket walking around in the White House. He's stereotypically that bonkers, but the things he's doing, the way he's gloating over these things, having no attachment to reality. I was saying we're finally seeing headlines that say it might not be that he's an inveterate liar. It might not just be that he's a congenital liar. Can we use those words interchangeably? But he might actually believe the things he's saying. I'm referring here specifically to the New York Magazine headline from Jonathan Chait's piece. New reports suggest Trump might not be a liar at all, but truly delusional. We have certainly alluded to that. Others have written the headline. New York Magazine isn't quite the same as having it as a top headline. Oh my goodness, the noise that comes with these calls. But there's a nice background music that comes with it anyway. That we haven't fixed, but I think we've fixed some of our other Skype problems. But anyway, I was saying the New York Magazine headline is not quite the same thing as having it on the banner headline in the New York Times or Washington Post, but it's progress, I guess, and it reaffirms a lot of what a lot of us have been saying and thinking for a long time. It might not be the case that he's just lying to do himself favors, but he might really live in a completely separate world. I think the triggering event for this belief coming out not only in the press but among Republicans in Congress who won't speak on the record but will speak anonymously is his shopping around the idea that the Access Hollywood tapes are fake. And apparently he's been asking people to just listen to it. Does that really even sound like me? It's such a ludicrous question for a guy with such a distinctive voice and speaking style to be asking, does that sound like me? Of course it sounds like, well, first of all, it is you. And if it's not, it's a brilliant imitation, and you should take away from that, at a minimum, you sound like an imbecile. And do I think it's you? Yeah, I think it's you because you're that imbecilic. This is the way you speak. This is the way you sound. These are the things you say to people. You're that big of an idiot. If it's a fake, it's a fantastic forgery. And, of course, no one's going to tell him that. Anyway, I don't know. I hope we're breaking through here. I hope that we're finding out writ large what the rest of us have been talking about here in our small podcast world for all this time. Greg Dworkin waiting patiently through this morning's rant. Good morning. Let's get to what the hell? Go to whatever you want. News, not news.
Yeah,
rant.
we'll do a little bit of stuff. There's a whole lot going on this morning.
Yes.
It's like one of those, what the heck is going on this morning?
Yeah, right.
It's a day that ends in Y, so I suppose it's not totally surprising.
Right. Well, my days begin with Y. Why?
Let's focus.
What?
Let's focus. Focus.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Let's deal with small things before we go to the big things.
Trump's fingers. All right. Go on.
Yeah, and his very small hands. Let's deal with the Hatch Act.
Hatch Act. All right.
Yeah. What do you know about the Hatch Act?
Virtually nothing. It's an unenforceable piece of junk law that no one ever gets called on.
Which is why actually there's Walter Schaub suing Kellyanne Conway for violating it.
Well, that's nice. I'm glad he's keeping her busy.
Right. This is a piece from Alex Eisenstadt that says the president has also expressed frustration that more pressure isn't being put on Roy Moore's Democratic opponent, former U.S. Attorney Doug Jones.
Why?
With so much coverage being paid to the Moore accusations, Jones has gotten an easy ride, Trump has vented. Last week, he gave White House counselor Kellyanne Conway personal approval to criticize Jones during an interview on Fox and Friends. Now, the Hatch Act has something to do with if you're a government employee, you're not supposed to be involved with political stuff.
But he gave personal approval. There's lots of layers to that. I'll get out of your way.
Right. So Walter Schaub just tweeted, ding, 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 we have a winner. Politico Alex, that's Alex Eisenstadt, the author of the article, says POTUS put Kellyanne Conway up to advocating against Doug Jones because the Moore allegations were giving Jones an easy ride. That, my friends, is the very definition of a Hatch Act violation.
Yes. I'm glad he's on it. I'm glad he's suing. We'll see. I'll cheer for him. He's right.
Now, OSC has to find Conway violated the Hatch Act. What's that, Office of Special Counsel?
Yeah, it is.
I shared my concerns about Special Counsel Kerner in an op-ed this week. Here's Kerner taking an oath to uphold the law. We're about to find out whether he's loyal to his country or his party.
Party.
Right. Okay, that's settled.
Okay.
But there's the background for like everything that they do is awful. Just everything. There's no single thing that they do that isn't awful. I will remind people I was not a big fan of George W. Bush. I thought he made a huge mistake and error with the Iraq War.
Yes.
I thought he was too partisan. I thought he tried to govern in a partisan fashion, but I found good things to say about him.
When, now?
No, back then. I thought that he did a very good job with PEPFAR, which is the president's emergency AIDS relief program, both especially overseas,
and
trying to save lives. And I thought he did a good job with pandemic flu prep.
Okay.
Which set us up for modern CDC approaches to how to deal with a flu pandemic, which we had back in 2009, and we'll have again. So I thought he did a couple. In other words, say two good things about George Bush. I can. Now, if you ask me to say two good things about Donald Trump, I can't.
No.
There's like nothing. Zero.
There really isn't.
Nada.
I mean,
nothing good about what he does. Nothing.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories that his followers circulate about when you ask them to say something. I mean, anything non-political. Now, of course, they just say, "Well, he raised the stock market to new heights." Well, whatever. But they used to even before Obama. He was in. They just basically lied, like, he's anonymously giving $1 bazillion to charity. Really?
Yeah, except he's not. Yeah, because he lies.
He isn't, and you'll never.
So,
be able
as
to
you
prove
pointed
it.
out this morning, Donald Trump retweeted a hate message. From
Several.
Britain First Deputy Leader, the far-right and ultranationalist British political organization formed in 2011 by former members of the British National Party.
Yes.
Jada Franson, who the President of the United States retweeted.
Yeah, I never heard of her, but
has been convicted for hate acts against Muslims.
Yeah, she's right. She's a
convicted.
convict. Do they still send? They don't send them to
felon.
Australia anymore. Sorry, right? So you're lucky, Australia. Good for you. Independence was a great idea.
No penal colonies. But the fact that the president of the United States would do that, whether it's Dan Scavino, his media guy, or whether he did it himself, really doesn't matter.
No.
The fact that this occurred is just a horrible thing, and it's one of those things that people take notice of this morning.
Yes, and
now, by the way, according to Dutch media, the culprit wasn't a Muslim, and he wasn't a migrant.
Oh,
he was a Dutch boy.
Oh, I see. Right in the in that one video. Yes, right. I had to crack up about that too. That was the one entitled like Muslim beats up
Muslim
Dutch
migrant
boy.
Beats up Dutch boy on crutches. It turns out he wasn't a Muslim and he wasn't a migrant.
Well, other than that though, and those
he was a 16-year-old Dutch citizen.
Yes, and I also heard that guy beat up Benjamin Moore when his arm was in a cast. So it's really unfair. He attacks all of the paint people.
Right. Anyway. So that's kind of like a big deal, and I think that's going on. There's still feedback and backlash about the New York Times Nazi piece.
Yeah, but he did like Panera, I understand.
Right. So Pointer, I think, had that was part of my pundit round this morning. Pointer had a great piece in here by Kelly McBride called How to Write About Nazis. She says, I was 22 when I covered my first skinhead march as a cops reporter in the Coeur d'Alene Bureau of the Spokesman Review newspaper. We were under constant pressure from the community to ignore the white supremacists among us, even though the FBI had a 5-person bureau just to keep track of them all.
Yes.
We learned through trial and error that documenting their presence and their activities was a constant balancing act. Give the Nazis too much attention, you normalize or glorify their repugnant beliefs, ignore them, and you spend a lot of time catching up when they finally do something violent that can't be ignored. So I recognize what the New York Times was trying to do in its profile of a Nazi sympathizer next door, but there were two key flaws in the article, one in execution and one in delivery. The execution failure was that although they did a good job of the Panera for lunch and Target wedding registry and normalizing them and all of that, where are the voices of the parents or anybody else who can describe the man's journey? We hear from one bandmate and one contemporary Nazi, but no sources describe the character's evolution, and this is a reporting failure.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Right? Then there's a delivery failure. The story and its presentation take on a day-in-the-life quality. It reads like the Times' How I Spent My Sundays feature. The reporter and his editor both shared the desire to reflect the pedestrian nature of white nationalists. In doing so, the Times played directly into the hands of the nationalist movement, which goes to great lengths to portray themselves as rational, viable alternatives to current mainstream politics. The Intercept documented the recent efforts of the movement to recast their online culture of trolls as political heroes. Had the Times included a bit more of this context, I suspect the backlash to the story would have been minimal. Journalists have several devices available for adding such context. The most obvious is an editor's note. This could be as simple as, here's why we're doing this. But a more complete note might describe a newsroom strategy for covering the growing white nationalist movement and point to a wider body of work. Now, journalists often reflexively resist such notes, suggesting they beg more questions than they answer, yet the audience loves these explanations. They view them as a peek behind the curtain. Another contextual device is the narrative digression. That's where the writer, often at an editor's request, employs contextual phrases, sentence and paragraphs, that hold sources accountable when they make outrageous claims. For example, the Times story reads, he declared the widely accepted estimate that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust overblown. He said while the Nazi leader Heinrich Himmler wanted to exterminate groups like Slavs and homosexuals, Hitler was a lot more kind of chill on these subjects. Now, there's a link.
Sorry. Yes.
The widely accepted estimate is a link, and it's a link to horror that talks about Holocaust facts.
Yeah.
And where does a figure of 6 million come from? So it's kind of like a political fact check. But the link is a grossly inadequate nod at the truth that 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust is not overblown. Why not add, the Nazis' own paper trail supports the 6 million murdered number, in addition to the research of historians, archaeologists, and government officials.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more words, and it disrupts the narrative flow, but for the audience member who knows the truth, the audacious nature of the statement reads like a record scratch and calls out for a break in the rhythm. And for the audience member who might wonder where the 6 million comes from, it's an opportunity to do a little explanatory journalism.
Sure.
So this journalist is in North Idaho.
Oh? Stay there.
Hey there. Hey, Idaho. And the best way to hone in on precisely what context your audience needs was to imagine what your neighbors were going to complain about when you ran into them at the coffee shop. But it's not a stretch to read the Times profile of a Nazi sympathizer in Ohio and envision some anger directed at the messenger. Good editors edit with loyalty to the reader, striving to create and refine a piece of journalism that will resonate. In this case, rather than hit the mark, the story offended. In doing so, the Times missed an opportunity to educate and inform those of us who are truly confused by the growing extremism of our fellow citizens. I thought that was an excellent piece and an excellent response. Of course, Alexander Petrie had her own version of it in the Washington Post. It's entitled Nazis Are Just Like Us. It's like the satire piece in the Atlantic we did on Monday.
Okay.
Why should the New York Times have all the fun? I spoke to the man who starts fires. He thinks everybody ought to be on fire. He wants the whole world to burn. I live in a fireproof house, but he wore a nice tie. He had a tattoo of a smiley face. He loves pop culture, and as we spoke, he lit everyone around us on fire.
Yeah.
But he didn't light me on fire because I was interviewing him.
Right. I had to finish. And he knew that, and he wanted the publicity.
Right. He was neat. He was polite, and I had no further questions for him. I thought that was a wonderful piece.
That does it. Yeah. Well, that's a good explanation, I think, of how they could have done the same piece and not have gotten quite as much flack. There certainly would be pushback. You can't avoid all pushback, but
sure.
Yeah, that's I think a good point. And of course she put things well too. Alex did.
Mm-hmm. So, guess what happened today? Matt Lauer got fired.
Yeah.
Today's show host Matt Lauer fired after claims of inappropriate sexual behavior. And of course, those of us who saw him moderate.
Yes, that's what people are talking about.
The military forum piece between him, Trump, and Clinton. Remember that he spent all that time hitting Clinton on her emails, and every time Trump would lie, he'd say, yeah, that's nice. Let's just go on and do something else, never challenging him.
Yes, that is true. And I didn't really find at the time that I felt like that was based in his being I didn't suspect for that reason, he may be a sexual harasser at work.
It's just a reminder, though.
Yeah.
That when we're looking at Charlie Rose, when we're looking at Matt Lauer, when we're looking at the people who shaped the news,
right?
Mark Halperin,
yeah,
Roger
Ailes,
Glenn Thrush,
yeah,
right.
Well, I mean, who shaped you're talking about people who shaped the news I read. That's true. Yes.
People who shape the news I read and hear about, and millions of people watch at Today's Show.
Yes.
And the idea that those particular individuals who help shape the news and the narrative, we talk a lot about narrative on the show, I do, happen to be not so cool with, not so down with women being equals.
Yes.
Is something as a subtext to remember about all of these things. It isn't just that their behavior is abhorrent. It is. And it isn't just on its face without any context. Their behavior is unacceptable and they're pigs. It isn't just that. It's that they shaped the news when a woman was running for president. And if people point and say, there was a little bit of misogyny going on here, and you go, no, that's impossible. And then you see key figures who help shape the narrative get hit for not treating women as equals, and in fact using power structure to try to gain things because of who they are and what they do, and then turn around and say, well, for example, how does Matt Lauer handle the news about Charlie Rose?
Oh yes, well, there's definitely that question. As well.
The answer is uncomfortably.
Yeah, what did
I didn't watch it, but apparently people who did say it was kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah, was he flop sweating and everything?
Yeah.
Huh.
So Elizabeth Wagmeister has a tweet this morning.
Wagmeister, I like that.
At Variety, Raman Setudeh, Setoodeh, sorry about the pronunciation, and I had been working on a Matt Lauer story for months, and NBC was aware. There are multiple women who we've spoken to with far-ranging accusations against Lauer. The power of journalism has never been more evident with this cultural change. So I hope they publish it. There's rumors the New York Times was working on a story. So when NBC fired him right away, it was with knowledge. Remember, she says NBC was aware they were working on this.
Yeah, okay.
It was with knowledge that something was coming out. So that's one of the reasons why they moved as swiftly as they did. I'm reminded of Ann Curry and we don't know the details, but she got into some kind of fight with Matt Lauer, and then she
Yes.
was let go from the Today Show.
Right.
What was that about?
I don't know. And I was just reminded of it this morning. I mean, that's really some part of the news I pay no attention to. In the morning, I'm busy.
All right. But in context now, with
bad.
this Donald Trump Harvey Weinstein moment,
Yeah.
it's hard not to pay attention.
It is. I'm certainly that'll bring me into that story's orbit. That's for sure. I won't ignore it just because I don't watch that news. I mean, I didn't watch any of the news I don't watch Charlie Rose. I never watched Roger Ailes, but I recognize that there's something going on here, and it's super important to the way we all think about everything, because these are the people who tell us what's going on in the world, and who knows what they're not telling us or
well, that's the thing. There's stories of commission where you tell a story, maybe you tell it in a different way, but there's so many more stories of omission where you simply leave out stuff which may turn out to be quite relevant.
Yes.
So all of that is part of the background. Meanwhile, politically charged accusations still are existence. Al Franken is still hanging on. John Conyers appears to be in bigger and bigger trouble, and seems to be a question of when he's going to resign. Conyers, not if. It's an interesting piece, though. In fact, I'm going to tell you two interesting pieces today by Jennifer Rubin.
By the way, I'm about to test our music and whether or not you're able to hear it. So what that means, of course, is our break is coming.
Very good. I'll just give you a preview, a little foreshadowing here.
Okay.
The next piece I'm going to go to is something called The Al Franken Dilemma by Jennifer Rubin, published on November 28th, and talks about what to do about Franken compared to everybody else.
Okay.
We'll get to that when we come back from this break.
All right. Are you able to hear the music today?
I am. I hear
right.
the
See,
music. What'd you do?
Well, I found some buttons and I pressed them. You know, that was an important methodology that I had overlooked to this point, that if I clicked on something different might happen. And it eventually did. So there you have it. We'll be back after this short break to catch back up. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio, where everything is happening all at once. All of the stories come crashing down around us as we broadcast. We're here with Greg Dworkin. We just took our break after, I guess, teasing the next round of stories. Let's pick up where we left off.
So we're going to talk a little bit about Al Franken, and we're going to talk about a Jennifer Rubin piece here entitled The Al Franken Dilemma. She says, Franken has said everything he could say. He sounded remorseful, not defiant. He said he'd cooperate fully with the Ethics Committee. Remember, this is an ex-Republican. He did not smear his accusers, the writer, that is Jennifer Rubin.
Yes, right.
And yet one wonders if that will be enough to spare him, or if it should spare him. It shook a churlish and sanctimonious Republican voice, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, to remind us that Republicans are behaving like hypocrites, like pals who have never embraced and endorsed President Trump, who has been accused of serial sexual misconduct by a list of women longer than even Roy Moore's known accusers. The things he's already admitted to I find to be outrageous and offensive, and I do think on that alone he should consider resigning, Rubio told WFOR-TV in Miami. And would Rubio say the same of Trump? And if so, why not? So here we are in a whataboutism dilemma, trying to differentiate between the accused sexual miscreants and yet not play partisan politics. We shouldn't overcompensate for whataboutism with an injudicious approach to running every public figure who has misbehaved out of public life. For one thing, we'd run out of public figures. So there's some basic guidelines we might follow. For starters, I love this one. No one who has endorsed Trump and had stood by him, has the moral authority to judge political opponents accused of sexual misconduct.
Okay.
Rubio's an enabler of Trump. He's also a once respected pol who helped normalize Trump and protect him from the consequences of his actions, sexual and otherwise. Whatever Rubio's motives now, unless or until he calls for a full investigation of Trump, no right to speak.
Okay.
Second, adults make moral and legal distinctions all the time.
Yes.
To spell it out, a serial child predator, that would be Roy Moore,
Yes, right.
is worse than a serial adult sexual predator, which is Trump, glossing over the walking into the beauty pageant stuff because that's a little
omitting
gray area there.
Well, in terms of the proof only.
In terms of not only the proof, in terms of how do you characterize it? Is that child predation, in other words?
Okay. Well, I think that happens.
It's predation. He's a predator.
Yeah.
Little gray area in terms of what ages Trump tends to go after, but not so much with Roy Moore. Who is worse than a crude comedian who had no business touching women without their consent? The conclusion that Moore doesn't belong in the Senate doesn't mean Franken should be thrown out. Franken deserves punishment, but the severity of the punishment does and should depend on the facts. This is one of those cases where actually, I don't think it's a dodge to say that Minnesota ought to weigh in on this too. I don't mean by if he's elected, therefore they've validated what he does. That's what people are claiming about Moore in Alabama, so it's not the same thing.
Right.
But I'm very interested in what people in his own state think of his actions. So far, polling I've seen doesn't especially support him. Third, unfortunately, good people do bad things. They need to be held accountable. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi called Conyers an icon, citing his role in opposing the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. She properly did not say he should be left off the hook for his alleged offenses against women. And that's the key takeaway. One can respect and accuse the accused and mourn the fall from grace of one's political idols, but that doesn't give them immunity for whatever actions they committed.
No.
It's an interesting thing about Conyers and Pelosi. I think Pelosi was awkward about this. I truly believe she was working behind the scenes to try to get him out, but publicly was trying to praise him because that's, carrot and stick kind of way that you do stuff. But, it didn't come across all that well, and she had to backtrack, which she did when under pressure for saying that he was an icon. She said, but that doesn't excuse him. She didn't say it on the day of the interview on Meet the Press, but she did say it when she was pressed later. So, that's all part of that piece there. Fourth, due process applies in courts and to a degree in the ethics procedures in Congress. It does not apply to voters urging miscreants to resign or not seek re-election. It doesn't apply to other public figures who are expected to show moral leadership. And finally, the notion that Trump's press secretary propagated, namely that Franken is a greater malefactor because he confessed and apologized, is morally obnoxious. Remorse should not necessarily spare the accused, but Trump and Moore's refusal to come to terms with their alleged acts and their indulgence in wild conspiracy theories, including the Trump saying the Access Hollywood tape might not have been authentic, make them worse, much worse, than somebody who seeks to make amends. So these are not easy situations, but we can avoid moral hypocrisy and blindness by distinguishing bad actors from worse ones, holding all politicians to a standard that like actions should result in like punishments, regardless of party, and by treating accused who falsely smear their accusers harshly. I thought that was a pretty good column and probably the best summary of the whole situation that I've seen. Now, Franken may still need to step down, and the Democratic Party may still need to clean their act up about a lot of this. And there may be more Democratic polls to come, as well as Republican polls. But still, it's reasonable to say this thing that one did needs to be punished, but it's not quite as bad as this thing that other person did, which really needs to be punished, maybe by criminal action.
Yes.
So anyway, I thought that was a good perspective.
I think so. Well, that was certainly all these additions are informative. And Jennifer Rubin. Okay.
Yeah. Well, she got another good one.
Oh.
And this one has to do with Benjamin Wittes.
Oh dear. Okay.
Why do people not like Benjamin Wittes? Tell me that.
He's a conservative.
He is. So he has this timeline.
Yes.
This little Twitter feed storm here, which is talking about truce with progressives and the left in order to get stuff done to help protect the country, which is kind of intriguing and interesting.
Okay. I'd be intrigued and interested by that.
Okay. So the lead into it, and let me just put this at the bottom. I don't know if I had it on the list that I sent you, but it's good enough, so I'll just put it right at the very bottom there. And
okay.
Here it is. Grouchy partisans just don't get it.
All right.
All right. She's not talking to you specifically.
Oh.
But she's just saying, grouchy partisans don't necessarily get it. Ben Wittes of Lawfare Block fame has tweeted out a manifesto, one tweet at a time, entitled Statement of Principles of the Coalition of All Democratic Forces of the United States of America. A rebuke of sorts to those who sneer at bipartisan, really apartisan, nonpartisan, opposition to President Trump. His 18-tweet thread began, I believe that any issue that Americans do not need to be actively contesting right now across traditional left-right divisions, Americans need not actively contesting right now across traditional left-right divisions. We've got grave disagreements about social issues, about important foreign policy questions, tax policy, about whether entitlements should be reformed or expanded, what sort of judges should serve on our courts. I believe in putting all of that aside. I believe in a temporary truce on all such questions, an agreement to maintain the status quo in major areas of policy dispute while Americans of good faith collectively band together to face a national emergency. And he argues this should include an active defense of the First Amendment's protection of free speech, press, and religion, focus on ethics and government, long-term battle against the corruption-prone opacity surrounding the president's personal finances and business interests, opposition to the abuses of power the president has called for, or promised or attempted during his campaign, his transition, and his months in office, and a restoration of decency in presidential conduct, Americans' treatment of refugees and migrants, in his treatment of domestic minorities, and in the way the president talks about foreign nations and individuals. While most of his suggested points of unity are institutional, he also offers some bipartisan policy principles, such as respecting Americans' alliances and in keeping our word, or at least the appearance of our word.
Okay, good enough.
And she suggests some action items. Vote for no politician who has endorsed President Trump or refused to confront his assaults on democracy. I guess she wouldn't be voting for Marco Rubio. Call it the reverse Roy Moore rule. No policy objective is worth perpetuating Trump and Trumpism. Number 2, support organizations demanding transparency and accountability, including an end to self-enrichment by Trump and his family. 3, engage in respectful debate with office holders wherever and whenever possible. Challenge members of Congress to perform their institutional roles as a check on executive power and give not one dime to any politician or political entity supporting Trump and his enablers. Don't just scream at the TV. Vote, rally, run for office, contact lawmakers, try to win over persuadable Trump voters who have begun to recognize he's a moral and political disaster. I'm there. Don't obscure bad behavior with oblique language. Call it a lie. Call sexual assault sexual assault.
All right.
If you think Fox News, Breitbart, and other right-wing outfits have defaced American politics, don't watch them.
Yeah.
And encourage and praise the dedicated civil servants in all corners of the executive branch who remain loyal to the Constitution and continue to pursue their work honestly and conscientiously.
Okay.
And she adds, listen, the last year has been emotionally exhausting for many Americans, but one of the benefits is rediscovering the fundamentals of good citizenship and the principles beyond day-to-day politics that bind us together as Americans. Cynicism and churlish criticism of any bipartisan efforts to address the threats to democracy and to decent political discourse are easy, but they're wrong and un-American. And this would go along with what I've talked about on the show a little bit about shared values and
Yes.
core beliefs, rule of law, for example, that I think we share even with conservatives. And there's no reason not to share those things. And it also goes along with the whole idea that, yeah, maybe 80% of Trump voters are deplorable and racist, and you can't change their mind, and racism is why they voted for him. But there's another 10%, maybe even more, on the fringe of that, who you can talk to, who basically have regrets, who would vote for not Trump next time.
Yes. Well, I certainly believe they're
Unless
out
you're
there.
Matt Lauer and you just wouldn't vote for a woman.
Right. I certainly believe they're out there, and I certainly believe they want to carve out a niche for themselves. I get what she's getting at, but she and Whitty's both speaking too broadly. Here's how I will solve the issue for you. Are you on our side? Terrific. Will you take the baton and lead the parade? No, you will not. Your party did this. I appreciate that you're leaving. That's fantastic. Give me that baton and get in my parade. We accept you as a marcher in the parade. Stop leading. Thank you for your opinion.
What if they are actually attempting to lead a section of never Trumpers and post-Republican conservatives within your parade that you can lead?
Then speak to them in partisan language and partisan terms. What I don't want is for them to be blocking out for me. Now, listen here. Before you Democrats get too excited about having been right since the beginning, let me tell you, the thing you need to do is not make me uncomfortable in coming to the realization that I've put a predatory, pedophilic wacko in the White House. And it's not my fault I didn't vote for him. I was a never Trumper. Okay, that's fine. Join the coalition. Your section is over there. Talk to anyone you want to have join that section. That baton isn't yours. Appreciate you showing up. Thank you.
Well, that's good enough. And on the other hand, if you were running, you wouldn't be yelling at voters for doing the wrong thing.
No.
Pointing out you've always been right.
If you were running, you wouldn't. But again, I guess I'll say here, Jennifer Rubin is not a Democratic political strategist, and we won't be shopping that advice around for Democrats to run. If you want to talk to Republicans who are ready to cross the line, you're our person for that job. And you and Benjamin Wittes, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. I'll back you, and I'll say everyone should listen to these two when you're trying to decide whether or not to get in line at the parade here. But, right. Yeah, dem-splaining this to me, no.
Well, just, again, a reminder, running is persuading. So If you're thinking about it in terms of persuading, it's not that different.
Well, I'm not running.
Right. So, and we'll agree to disagree about this as a long-running, conversation. But I think that to the extent that, and I would guess that most Democrats actually don't really read Jennifer Rubin, so... Yes, I'm not really sure who her audience is these days, but still points well taken.
They're good points. They just and maybe they're not for me, but you know what? I like you need context for the Nazi story. I think you need context for this one. But
yeah,
since it's
it's the same thing as saying, listen, Mitt Romney said something good. Yeah, but remember all this other stuff that he did, including accepting Donald Trump's endorsement.
Yeah. I mean, we were in a world of crap for a long time because Jennifer Rubin
I still wouldn't vote for
Romney,
but, he's a more decent person than Trump is.
Yes. I'll tell you, I'll put it this way also. We started the show saying, there are good things to be said if you look around for George W. Bush. But were we fans? Do we follow him? No. Same thing for Jennifer Rubin.
Yeah, fair enough.
She said some things since I'm glad you regret belonging to a party that I think obviously was going to eventually do something like this. But, if we tar you with that, then you won't do your recruiting work. Well, let me ask you this. Are you the patriotic American who's going to put their nose to the grindstone and do this work even if we don't praise you and coax you along, or are you not? If you're not, go.
Right. Basically that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. The Moore Doug Jones race is still close. The latest polls appear to be trending toward Moore. But again, reminder, some of these polls are a little difficult. I like the ones that have polled repeatedly because you get a better sense within poll trend. But part of the poll difficulty is it's a special election. And you got to figure who's going to show up and who's not going to show up. 2 weeks left, and Moore probably has a 3 to 4 point lead.
Yeah. Well, I told you, like everybody, it was obvious enough. We wished that the election had been earlier. And that's the so somebody put it this morning on Twitter. Maybe it was last night. It might have been. You know what? I don't know if I can pinpoint it. But this is the timing of the Moore issue was much more Access Hollywood than Comey letter. And we might have hoped for different. But, these things, they break when they break. And making the call about when to break them politically for a newspaper would have been terribly unwise.
Right. So anyway, we'll see what happens. Polls aren't the actual election. And the write-in candidate, who is the John Kelly aide, who's announcing his candidacy, I have no idea. I literally have no idea whether that's going to make any impact whatsoever or not.
Who could tell?
The reason is
probably not, but
the reason is that there are people who don't want to vote for Moore but cannot vote for Jones, and the question is what they do.
Right?
Do they stay home? Do they do a write-in? Do they actually vote for Moore in the end because they just can't vote for Jones? That's the part that's still a bit of a mystery. So I think Jones's job right now is to keep the vote close, but also work on some of the other issues that he's doing in his ads, including, Alabama's 49th in education. You want to do something about that. And there's other things that, have a lot to do with where things are.
Yeah.
Also,
that's 'cause they're pulling kids out of trig.
Leah Kaufman, one of the accusers,
yes,
has an open letter today saying, you keep saying I'm a liar. I'm not. I'm actually telling the truth. You keep saying I'm being paid by George Soros. I'm not.
Yeah.
And this is real, and you're going to have to account for it. Again, we'll see how all of this plays out. It's not done yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we will have to see how that plays out. Do you have her open letter handy by any chance?
No, but I could fetch it.
Yeah, maybe we could at least pocket that. But yeah, right. I was glad to see that she's saying, all right, I'm not going to stay silent any longer. She wasn't silent. She spoke through the Washington Post, but now she feels like, you know what, this is personal. I need to push back. I agree. Couldn't blame her in the least for wanting to do that. And don't know why I would want to ever anyway. So simple enough.
I will fetch that for you. But while I'm looking for it, here it is. A message to Roy Moore from his accusers. I am done being silent. This was in the Chicago Tribune. And Leigh Kaufman, who says Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore touched her sexually when she was 14 and he was 32, has written him an emotional letter insisting he stop calling her a liar. So here's the story that I'll post right at the bottom there.
I like that. She's kind of summed it up. What was her line was, where does your immorality end? And you've been lying about this for 40 years, and you're starting a whole new round of lies about it, and it's despicable.
Right. Not just that, but when she was interviewed, and the interviewer said to her, well, Moore says he doesn't know you, and she said, how many me's are there?
Right. Yeah. Oh, I don't know her. Yeah. Well, you didn't know her then either, but I mean.
Right. Anyway, so that's the Chicago Tribune story of that. The last thing I'm going to lead you with is completely different, but it happens to be an academic article I came across, which I thought was interesting.
It is completely wrong.
Right. It is in...
I'm making that up. Okay, yes.
It's in the journal Climactic Change.
Okay.
And the title of the article
is
The Spatial Distribution of Republican and Democratic Climate Opinions at State and Local Scales. And to make a long story short, and I sent you some pictures to go along with it, just because I thought it was so fascinating.
Oh, that's up at the top. Okay.
You are more likely, as a Republican, to think global warming is happening based on geography. You're more likely to believe, as a Republican, that global warming is happening if you live in New York or California than if you live in the middle of the country or in the South.
'Cause there's people around you telling you it's true.
Yeah. So there might be a variety of reasons for that, or it might be, for example, in California, you have, firestorms.
Oh, right.
And,
yes.
Things like that. So other things
like it's not happening
climate,
in Florida.
Yeah. So that might be part of it. But, it's just fascinating. And then they have a list here. I sent this to you as well. % of registered Republicans supporting state-level renewable portfolio standards by state. And it's way, way higher in New York, well over 50%, whereas the bottom of the scale is Wyoming, followed by West Virginia. In other words, coal country. So all politics is local. And if you live in coal country and you're a Republican, you don't believe in climate change. And if you live in New York and Connecticut is the second state, Massachusetts third. If you live in the Northeast, you very much do.
Yeah. Huh. What's the second one here? State registered Democrats by state.
It's
thing.
similar. Now, if you're looking at Republicans who believe in climate change, this is a surrogate question for belief in climate change by state. New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Maine. Those are the top Republican states. The Democratic states, by far, Maine, looks like. Idaho.
Idaho, yeah, that's what has me interested.
Little tiny letters. I'm trying to read it and make it.
All right.
Dakota, Oregon, Kansas, Connecticut, Arizona, Colorado. And at the bottom for Democrats is West Virginia and Kentucky.
Yes.
Also Wyoming. Again, coal country makes you not want to listen.
Yeah. Idaho, though. So I'll ask Joan about that one. We're talking about...
Democrats in Idaho are very cool, and Joan will vouch for that, I think.
Yes. Well, I'll vouch for that. I know Joan.
Well, individually.
That's it. That's all the Democrats. There's more, as it turns out. But I guess if you're going to be... I guess you could explain it this way. If you're going to be a Democrat in Idaho, you got an uphill battle. You're not likely to abandon belief in the scientific validity of climate change just because you're surrounded by Democrats. Conversely, in at least in New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, if you're a Republican, you're I guess somewhat persuadable on climate change, or maybe you just always believed it because you're just used to seeing your friends and neighbors believe science.
Right. Well, I'll just remind you of something that's one of my favorite quotes. I used to use it as a signature when we had signatures on the blog. But it's an Upton Sinclair quote from 100 years ago. And it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it.
Yeah.
So if you live in coal country,
that's right.
You're not really going to be terribly receptive to the idea that climate change is man-made and you're a part of it.
That's true. And this illustrates a lot of interesting
so it happens to be about
climate
climate change, but
Party.
take the bigger picture.
Right.
And, okay, this is why some people believe what they believe based on where they live.
Yeah. And I was going to say it even applies a little bit to the question of what kind of Democrats are you likely to get standing for office
in West Virginia?
red states?
Joe Manchin.
Different.
And should you be surprised? I mean, that's the way it's going to be. Or, a Jim Tester. In Western states.
Yeah. And so it's even more localized than all of that. It's one thing to say, yes, West Virginia is going to produce that kind of a person, but it's also not necessarily an excuse for finding yourself a rather strongly conservative blue dog type person in Idaho. That doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. You're not necessarily going to produce this. You might not find it. Then you may not win. That's true. But, you're appealing to a different set of red state Democrats in West Virginia as against Idaho. So interesting also, and something to keep in mind.
Yep. So with that, I'll leave you. This is Greg Dworkin, speak with my very good friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. There are men that haven't really, committed sexual offenses, and I'm speaking with one. I am one. And, I just remind you that those that have need to pay for it.
Yeah.
It's not all men.
Although
it's no
all
excuse.
I can say is, I think so. I mean, I think it's
not
that's
all
what
men.
Al Franken
said, not good enough. You have to say, I know so.
I mean, I know.
And make it so.
What?
This is your responsibility. It's not a woman's responsibility. It's yours and mine, and all men really have to step up to the plate.
Oh, no,
say,
yes,
enough.
they have to do that. That's not the I think so thing. I guess it's sort of like, one of the things I'm learning along the way is very often people will discover that things they didn't think were terrible actually were. And part of that process is waking up to that. And when it's brought to your attention and saying, if that happened, my God. You know what? I didn't think of that way at the time, and it was a mistake not to. And I'm slow in learning, and that's a bad thing in itself.
Well,
but I'm
again,
glad I'm finding
I'll just
out.
end with there's a difference between Al Franken and John Conyers.
Well, yes.
And there's a big difference between Al Franken and Roy Moore.
Yes, that's true too. I don't
take care,
not
and
believe that.
I'll leave you with that thought, and we'll be back tomorrow. We'll see what's going on then.
All right. Well, I assume there'll be a tomorrow at this point. We'll see how
there's
day
the North
ends.
Korea thing. We didn't get to that, but we'll see. Assuming there's a tomorrow, I'll talk to you then. Take care.
Right. Take care. Yeah. See you tomorrow, maybe, if there is one. Yeah, we left that off the list. How can like I said, there's an awful lot happening all of a sudden, all at the same time. There was a lot happening yesterday. And as we were rushing around between kids' activities yesterday, the discussion in the family, my wife saying, I can't believe this North Korea thing isn't, all anybody's talking about. And she's right. It's hard to believe that it's not. But there are so many insane things happening all over the place that it's hard to say. It was one of those days where half your Twitter feed is some world-changing / world-ending hair on fire situation, and the other half is about people pointing to other people's situations and saying that one's not as important as the one I have over here. It was a tough day. These days are mentally exhausting. Wow. Anyway, so yeah, that was an interesting discussion and a little bit of disagreement, I guess, over what to do with the input, valuable as it is, from Jennifer Rubin. You know what I guess happened here? And, I'm sure she would take it, had she participated in the conversation, as proof that she was right to headline her piece, Grouchy Partisans Just Don't Get It. But I gotta tell you, I feel like that's a backhanded way of pushing your way to the front of the parade. Well, I understand what you're saying, but remember, grouchy partisans like you just don't get it. And, you know what? I think a concession needs to be made to the fact that there were people who had it right in terms of their alignment, all along. And I know that's like insulting to you. Oh, you're going to tell me you were right about this all along. There's so many things you were wrong about. Well, like what? Except I would invite you to tell me what I was wrong about, except we all know that would just be whataboutism, which you said is a horrible thing. And back to the back of the parade again. Now, you don't have to march in the back either. I'm not going to insult you that way or make any allusions to any other discredited political theories and ideologies that were out there. But all I'm saying is, like I said, we don't need at this point to have Republicans, Republican or however you want to put it, Republican, Demsplain, I don't know. We'll be back to talk about it in a second. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. I don't want to linger too much longer over this particular issue or this particular piece by Jennifer Rubin, except to say that I'll say this. I think she gives short shrift to people that she wants to make common cause with. And I guess if we're going to make concessions and stand out of the way and say there's more power in the numbers if we include you than if we exclude you, great. I'll make that concession, and I'll ask for equal or possibly even greater concessions, given that you're coming to the coalition from the party that enabled this in the first place. And I understand you say you were always against it, and I might even be able to agree with all of the proof that you offer that argues that you were always against it. But I'm saying you're coming over the fence here and leaping to the front of the parade. Not going to go over all that well. But on the other hand, this is a coalition, and somebody ought to be marching nearby the front of parade, if not holding the baton, then firmly grasping the banner, identifying what the parade is. And there ought to be a representative from your group there. And if you're campaigning for the job, fine. Put your name in the hat, and we'll see whether you or Benjamin Wittes or someone else ought to be afforded that rank, that job. But yeah, when it gets to like the grouchy partisans thing, you know what? You were a grouchy partisan for so long, and then you had the cancer of Donald Trump grow inside your party, and you recognized you had cancer. Terrific. You're a good doctor. It's just I don't know if I want you leading, my leading consultant on this team. You want to take a specialist role in this? I'm not opposed to that. I think it's a great idea. But, like I said, if you're going to, try and, I don't even know what to call it anymore. She's not Republican-splaining it or to Dem-splain it, or I don't know, I'm misapplying those names and the splain suffix here. But, yeah, it's always going to go over poorly when, we used to call it concern trolling when we didn't really believe you had the same interests at heart. Now that we think, well, okay, in the broad picture, in the greater scheme of things, we have, we have to understand that, okay, maybe this time we really are on more or less the same page. But I guess if you ask the question of what comes next, and you always have to ask the question of what comes next, because history is replete with the stories of the crack up of successful coalitions, be they revolutionary or something, somewhat less than revolutionary, but a victorious coalition cracks up in the end when the question becomes, what do we do next? And I don't think anybody should make any mistakes about what should be, where she'll be on the question of what comes next. Replace Donald Trump with a more broadly acceptable politician and ask the leader of that coalition, ask Ben Wittes, even for a probably clearer answer, ask Jennifer Rubin. And here's what I think the problem is. Ask Jennifer Rubin whether the politician who comes next ought to be a Democrat or a Republican. And at heart, she's going to want to say, it ought to be a Republican. Those are the people I agree with most. Our coalition's work is done, and so now I prefer a conservative Republican, whereas I do not. And if one side, let's say, of the one part of this coalition is providing the bulk of the ground troops to see our cause succeed, then that bulk ought to be the core to which we turn in asking who should be the replacement, or what kind of person should they be, from what portion of the political spectrum might we draw this person. And you'll choose somebody from what used to be the Republican side, or is still the traditional Republican side. We don't agree about the direction of the country after Donald Trump. You want to join a temporary coalition in getting rid of him? Fine. But also, along the way, you don't need I don't want to hear you. Maybe you think you need to. I don't want you to do it anyway. And maybe we're not talking about the same kind of evaluation that we need to give the value of what you have to offer. But the idea that you're going to foreshadow this to me, I guess that's it. To me, I think it's foreshadowing for you to say, well, there's no room for your grouchy partisanship, which is it's a fine way of framing the issue to try and convince people who likewise are late to the party, let's say, that the progressive Democrats in the coalition ought not to be the ones to whom we turn next. And I don't like the implication, quite frankly. And just as I don't like the idea that if you are, we'll get rid of our noise here and answer the phone. But I don't like the idea, just to finish this up, that you're trying to, it looks to me like you're going to rig the outcome post-Trump by saying, well, just because the Democrats were right all along about this doesn't mean that we're going to give them any power or the opportunity to try and make things right. Now, we may task one or another of them with doing that, but of course, if you're under any illusions about whether or not, for instance, Jennifer Rubin will immediately resume attacking any Democratic successor to Donald Trump for pursuing exactly the policies they said they wanted to pursue pre-Trump and continued to say they support post-Trump, then you don't know who Jennifer Rubin is. And, if this is the framing she wants to use to push you out of the way, I'd say at least be wary of it, if not reject it outright. You know what? Okay, we want to play a political game? Fine. Yes, you make a good point. La, la, la. Okay, and then as soon as Trump is gone, I will say, I've just tossed Trump overboard, tied to an anchor. Hold this rope, Jen. and I won't be, and I'll have no regrets about it. Okay? There. Maybe that's what others aren't admitting, but I guess I'll do it for you. Anyway, not a lot of time, I am warned, for Joan McCarter to hang around today, so we might as well get to her sooner rather than later. Why? Is anything happening today, Joan? It's like the hottest news morning ever, and it's not even a war.
And that's outside of the stuff that's my beats. It's just
yes. All hair has been on fire all week. Anyway, on your beats, and this is just lumped on top of all of that.
yes.
And not to mention,
It's sort of just, a miasma of scary, crazy, unpredictable stuff on top of the predictable bad stuff.
yeah.
So, anything
Plus
could
net
happen this
neutrality.
day. Anything.
Really true. How would you like to begin? I wouldn't know how to direct you on something like
Well,
this.
It actually started with, I just posted a story arguing that maybe Democrats need to let a government shutdown happen this year.
There's not even necessarily a whole lot that we would be able to do if we wanted to help things along and not have one, to be honest.
Schumer and Pelosi were being responsible in not attending that meeting with Trump yesterday. They're doing the responsible thing by refusing to negotiate with him.
Yes, and not just from a partisan perspective, but if there's work that needs to be done to keep the government open, and obviously there is, why would you spend any of the time that could be done doing that work sitting next to a guy who said, I'm not going to work with you?
Yeah.
We're not going to reach an agreement.
Yeah.
Okay, well, should I spend the hour there or should I spend the hour here with people who don't say such things?
And, provided that there are enough Republicans to abide by the rules and traditions of the Congress and still have 218 votes to pass things, don't get rid of the filibuster, they have to have Democrats to pass this stuff. So, yeah, at this point, Democrats sitting it out is the best thing that they can do. And it feels really weird to be rooting for a government shutdown. But I'm not sure what else to do.
I mean, all we can do, we can say, look, we're rooting for the position of doing the right thing and advocating for the right policies. And if that results in a government shutdown, that is bad, but going to happen, as opposed to actually Republicans used to root for government shutdowns because they said, I actually hate the government and I think it would be a good thing for the American people to operate without it. Whereas I say, not really the case, but yeah, for people who are advocating, this is going to be on you. Donald Trump, of course, insisting, I'm going to blame Democrats. Don't really think that can actually, work out for him. He can try it, but yeah, if the implication is, well, you have to agree to vote for things to which you're fundamentally opposed, or else I'm going to blame you for that. Yeah, well, blame me because I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, you won't succeed, but who cares? You're not going to succeed in anything. You've been a failure at everything you've ever done in your life. I don't know why anything else should be different. But you don't need me to explain that to you, and you wouldn't believe me anyway.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So what a week you must be having.
It's been an interesting week. We've got the showdown at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Yes.
Where
so
we've
absurd.
got a squatter from the Trump administration, Mick Mulvaney, who has been absolutely clear that destroying the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has been one of the things he really wants to do.
Yes.
And the officially duly appointed acting director, named by Richard Cordray before he left on Friday.
Yes. Because the
Leandra
law says
English.
that. Yeah. And it's a very weird confrontation. And of course, Trump would, of course, insist that she's the squatter, and he'd point to a procedural victory, I guess, in court I mean, he just took that to say, I won, the whole thing is over, I won the court case, I won. And I'm surprised he didn't hashtag, it was me again.
I'm surprised as well. He did have his Trump-appointed judge
Yeah, I mean,
giving
that
him
does
that
help.
win.
Right.
Which is a whole nother story we could talk about. But
yeah. And I'm not entirely certain. From a purely academic standpoint, I think the case is fascinating. I wish that I had more confidence in the judge handling it, and I'm sure this will get to an appellate level where I'll have slightly more confidence.
It'll get to the D.C. Court of Appeals probably pretty quickly, and it's going to depend on the panel that reads it there.
Yeah.
From my reading, and I am a layperson, I am not a lawyer, even though I often end up having to play one on the blog. The Federal Vacancies Act, Reform Act, that the White House is relying upon for their reasoning, says specifically if the agency in question, if the statute creating the agency in question doesn't have succession rules in it.
Yes.
I'm not stating this very well, which Dodd-Frank did for the CFPB.
Right.
Dodd-Frank said, this is how we pick directors.
Yes. If you don't have something like that.
Apparently it's only in the vacuum of that the Federal Vacancies Reform Act is supposed to kick in. So it would seem from my layperson's reading of the law that Dodd-Frank would trump, not a pun intended,
right,
the Vacancies Reform Act.
Yes,
but
I mean, it's for where they're, and also, I mean, you might argue, okay, well, when do we use the Vacancies Reform Act? When there's a vacancy, and I don't have one.
Yeah.
So what are you doing here?
And then you've got the other just little problem of Trump deciding to install an interim director for no specified time period, could be forever,
right,
in a position that is supposed to be confirmed by the Senate.
Yes, also problematic. And we haven't finished with the problems. That guy has another job.
Yeah.
And he's not leaving it. So, I mean, that is interesting all by itself. You don't know anybody else in the whole world. The President of the United States, presumably you've met a lot of people along the way. There's binders full of God knows what out there. Him?
Yeah.
One, the guy who thinks it's a sick joke or whatever. Two, he's already employed somewhere else. Three, it's an important job, and he's not seemingly leaving that one. They could have come at this from a much clearer place, to be sure.
Yes. Yes, they could.
So that's nutty.
Okay. And speaking of Trump judges, they're having a hearing on one from Minnesota today for which Al Franken did not give his blue slip.
Yes.
Although Amy Klobuchar did, because Amy Klobuchar, I don't know what.
Yeah, maybe she thought someone would like her more. I don't really know.
He's awfully hard right, this judge coming before them. Strassa, I think his name is.
Okay. I would like to hear Klobuchar's explanation. It might be good, but I don't know it.
This is the one that they had meeting with House Republicans from Minnesota before making him available to meet with Klobuchar or Franken.
And they don't vote on that. So
right. So yeah, so that's happening. And in the background, the argument from the Federalist Society that this needs to be happening more, dozens and dozens and dozens of times more, so that we end up with a judiciary that has an additional 480 judges, giving Trump as many judges as all the previous 9 presidents combined.
Yes. That's
that's happening.
Yeah, I mean they're not inventing anything there. I mean we should confirm judges and it should be done quickly. Okay, I mean absent the fact that it's Donald Trump, deluded idiot, making the nominations, that's true. We should move nominations quickly.
There in this nominations story, there's one tiny glimmer of sanity
Okay.
coming from all places, Louisiana freshman Senator Kennedy, who says there's no way he can vote for the ghost hunting would-be judge.
Yeah.
And that this whole thing is pretty stupid. He's got a problem with the judges that Donald Trump is nominating. So
fair enough. I'm
I
glad
don't know,
somebody
maybe
said
there's
it.
a little tiny crack there that we can start putting a wedge in.
Yeah. Well, you would hope so. I mean, honestly, when you get rated not qualified, yeah, that should be it. The ABA will, honestly, they rate as qualified all the time horrendously right-wing judges, but they've been to law school, they've practiced law, and they write things that sort of kind of hold together as opinions, but we don't agree, and we think they're crazy for the opinions they have, but they structure them properly and show their work. So, okay, that's minimally qualified, and then fine, go to town if you want to. But when they can't even say, this guy, I'm not even certain, like, did he cheat in law school? Where's this guy's head? He's got no, or in his case, there's nothing to look at here. He's just literally almost a guy off the street. And we do think he went to law school, but that's literally it. Then you say, you know what? I'm sorry. You're qualified to be a lawyer in whatever state said so. Terrific.
If
Go
you
for
pass
it.
the bar, okay. Go hang up your shingle.
Sure.
But
come back in 10 years.
If you're going to be on a federal court, perhaps you should at least have tried a case before a judge.
Right.
One.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Yes, right. We don't want the guy who just learned, from watching TV. Like if you show up and hit your gavel and, that's not what you do.
In a Matlock seersucker suit.
Right. Well, okay. I'm glad he's come around to that. That's nice. Hopefully he'll bring others with him.
So, maybe it'll happen. Apparently now I'm following Jessica Pieklo, Hedge Mommy, on Twitter, and Feinstein is fighting back a little bit in Judiciary Committee right now. So when we get off, I'll have to go follow that and hope that maybe Feinstein is doing something today. Maybe Democrats will just walk out of the committee hearing and let Grassley have his way. I don't know.
I guess so. Yeah.
There's today is very discouraging, Kagro.
Yeah. Well, for a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of bad things happening around the world. Yeah, it's a tough morning.
60 days since Chip was defunded.
A milestone, I guess, in that sense.
Lapsed or whatever you would say. I mean, it still exists as statute. It just doesn't have any money behind it.
Yes.
Any new money. Colorado became the first state on Monday to start sending out letters to clients saying this might not be around next year and you probably should be taking some measures to find insurance for your kids. Oregon is on the verge of having to do that, and we are about to pass a really, truly devastating tax cuts bill in the Senate.
Yeah, maybe.
They're setting it up probably for... They're saying as early as tomorrow. That's not going to happen. I don't think they can make it happen quite that fast. So probably very early next week, they'll try to have it on the floor.
Thursday is the end of the week in the Senate.
Yes.
Okay.
Although they might be in Friday for this.
They do
because
occasionally
it's,
do
massive tax cuts for the wealthy and screwing poor people. So that's always a priority. That's worth working on Friday for.
Yeah, well, they think so.
So much horrible in this bill that it's really sort of hard to focus on any one thing.
And
there's Obamacare mandate repeal.
Right.
13 million people losing health insurance in the next 10 years. Not 13 million people not getting health insurance, but people losing health insurance.
Yeah.
There's a weird abortion provision that they snuck in.
Well, yes. Well, I think we could almost assume that, but you want to point out what it is each time.
It's declaring your fetus worthy of tax credits for going to college. So basically, it's a personhood thing. In terms of taxes, of what the federal government recognizes at the Treasury Department as a human being, for tax purposes, is a fetus. Which legally is a really scary, scary, scary place to go.
Yes. So, but even for tax purposes, which they're trying to sneak that in, like, oh, that's good. What does that mean? I take a deduction for a fetus?
You can deduct the money you put into a college savings account for your fetus.
Okay. What about if I save for a gleam in my eye?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, you think?
That'll be next.
I did see Dana Hool suggested that this will be terrific for your taxes if you have any frozen embryos, either around the house. I assume people keep them in the lab or whatever. But if you've been in for in vitro fertilization treatment at any point, can I claim any of them? Or do you say fetus? It can't just be an embryo?
It could be an embryo.
Or
we
you know
don't
what?
know.
Right. Well, that's
it's probably not that well defined, actually.
Yeah, maybe not.
In their step, because they're,
who knows? I guess try it. I'm not an accountant. Don't take this as professional advice, but I'm guessing you won't be audited. I have 7,000. How many? I don't know how many frozen embryos people will have, but you could be in the dozens. Try it.
I think it's in the dozens. Heck, why not? Push that tax law.
If they audit you and send you a note, put some money in escrow to pay up if necessary. But someone should try it out.
Somebody should. Let's see. We've got.
Don't forget to incorporate each one of them.
I don't know, 2 weeks of open enrollment in Obamacare.
Yes.
Still going very strong, but because it's going to be a short enrollment period, it's not going to be as good as last year's. But given it all, it's going really well. So, yay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. I'm glad people are taking advantage of the ability to sign up.
It really is important. I mean, it's the one thing that could stave off the destruction of the law a little bit longer. Maybe even by November 2018, when maybe we can inject some sanity back into our government.
I hope so. I just realized my oldest son will be eligible to vote in the 2018 elections.
Oh,
I realized it the other day, actually. I sort
You're
of
old.
Scared myself to death with that. But, yeah, he'll be, I guess he turns 18 just before the elections, and I guess he can register ahead. I don't know what the rules actually are, but I'm pretty sure I've read in the past you get to register even if you're just 17, and so long as you can show them that your birth date will be before the election. Even though that paperwork takes a long time, I think they still have to let you register.
Yeah.
We'll check what it's like in Virginia. But
good luck.
So we're going to increase our voting power. That's true. We should increase our voting power of the household by 50%. That's good news in Northern Virginia.
Let's see, what else? Net neutrality.
I know.
No
I can't believe.
Sorry.
Yeah. You've been working on that since forever, and it's almost it's a standing thing. Jones on, there's a problem with net neutrality. I know that this is going to be true, and it's true again.
It's true again. A lot of folks are saying call the FCC. It's too late to call the FCC. So if you're taking action on net neutrality, hammer your members of Congress, your Republican members of Congress. That's only a handful of people I know living in red states listening to us now, but that's really where you have to speak up. They've got to hear the millions of voices in support of net neutrality, because Pi at the FCC doesn't care. He'll ignore
that's a problem.
You. He is ignoring you.
Yes. Plus, during the comment period, it seems that real people like you were drowned out by Russian bots again.
Yes.
Insisting that they were real people and making public comments that way.
And they're doing two things with that at the FCC. They're saying, look, we have as many anti-net neutrality comments. We have all of these hundreds of thousands of anti-net neutrality comments. But at the same time, they're saying, look at how corrupted the comment period was. We can just ignore it.
Oh.
So.
Well, that's an interesting way of approaching that problem. Well, they turned a negative into a positive, and I admire their positive mental attitude. But yeah, you can't just, until we find out that they were helping arrange some of that, which isn't necessarily out of the question. I guess it's a way of dealing with it. But yeah, okay, so you say still call your red state senators and representatives about this. That's your only entry point. Okay. Well, we're going to take our second half break and be back in 2 minutes right after this.
And I'm afraid I'm going to have to depart now.
Okay. Good morning and welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I don't know if we were able to sneak in. I thought we might have snuck in right at the end just before we exited for our break was word from Joan that, I can't stick around. I can't even stay to the other side of the break. Tell everyone goodbye. Good luck. And stay American, you folks. And those of you who are not, well, stay whatever you are. But stay pro-American. Anyway, she's got to run. There's too much craziness going on, and she's got to go write about it. And I think we were lucky just to have her for a couple of minutes. Imagine all this stuff blowing up in your face all at once, and so much of it on her beat, and so much not. Thankfully, of course, the whole team at Daily Kos is on the job there and ready to handle these things. But there's like 10,000 things that require Joan's attention and input. So we'll wait to hear from her again next week, at which point we will likely, I would think, I believe that they'll have difficulty getting the tax bill vote put together this week. And I am not even certain that it's something they'll be able to do at the beginning of next week either. I would say there's a good chance that by the time we speak to Joan next, we're still watching them play out the tax vote. Now, it'll be Wednesday at that point, and they'll want to be done Thursday. So my guess is they will have begun the march towards passage of the tax bill, which again would be done under reconciliation. And so therefore, they're going to want to start the clock. So they're probably either beginning debate Wednesday morning, and she might have to break away to cover the beginning of the debate, which would probably happen during the show, maybe even during the 10 o'clock hour. But hopefully we can at least catch up with her next week. All right, let's see. Other crazy stuff happening. God, who even knows what direction to go? Here, I'm going to start with this story. Just because it'll be fun and you'll recognize what's going on. Not the biggest story in the world, but the Washington Post has this one, and Rosalind Helderman and poor Alice. I got to figure out. I need to take proactive steps to figure out how she pronounces her last name because she's everywhere. Alex Krites, Krites, Crites. Does anybody know? Does anybody have any guess? Is there any way of finding out? Will the Post tell me? Will they do something where you can click on somebody's name and get the pronunciation? Because she's on every story. But this one is a new one. The Russian billionaire next door, Putin ally, is tied to one of DC's swankiest mansions. Eyebrow-raising headline, but wait till we get to the text. When Washington's Grand Haft Mansion near Embassy Row changed hands in 2006, it was one of the most expensive home sales in the history of the city and one of its most mysterious. 2006. The 23,000 square foot, 7-bedroom home, very nice, featuring Italian marble floors and a chandelier that once hung in the Paris Opera House, was sold by discount retail magnate Herbert Haft's widow. The home is not on discount. They made their money discounting other stuff. For $15 million in cash to a company incorporated in Delaware, according to filings. The buyer was never identified. Okay. Happens a lot, as we know, increasingly in the real estate world. And you might be wondering, well, how does this get to the Washington Post, et cetera? Italian marble floors, chandelier, Paris Opera House. Those, I don't know what they look like. They could be there's very nice Italian marble, and there's very nice chandeliers, and then there's gaudy crap. That makes me think, did Donald Trump buy this thing? But Donald Trump doesn't like to buy things anonymously for the most part. Even when he's trying to hide the ball with LLCs, he still sticks Trump in the name of the LLC because he's an idiot, and a vain idiot at that. So who bought this thing? It's done in 2006. Is it really a story? A company in Delaware, according to filings, that could mean anything. People love to hide things by incorporating in Delaware in particular. Interviews and documents reveal for the first time that the mansion is connected to a Russian billionaire. A Russian billionaire? How could that be the case? Is that something to worry about? Are we in dramatic music territory? Well, I guess we are. That always worries anybody anytime a Russian billionaire buys anything. A mansion on Embassy Row, though, does that matter that much? Let's find out. Interviews and documents reveal for the first time the mansion is connected to a Russian billionaire who is a key ally of President Vladimir Putin of Russia. He's also, by the way, he's president of the United States as well. But, we play and pretend that's Donald Trump. And also is a long-time business associate of Paul Manafort. Wow, if there isn't another Russian billionaire who's close to Putin, who's associated with Paul Manafort, I'll be darned. Anyway, he is, of course, the recently indicted former chairman of President Trump's campaign. The Washington Post has found that for more than a decade, the owner of the Haft Mansion, hiding behind a Delaware incorporated LLC, no doubt, I'm not certain of their corporate form, but probably an LLC, it's going to be somebody whose name you know. It's Oleg Deripaska, Russian aluminum magnate. That always cracks me up with respect to aluminum. Oleg Deripaska has secretly held ties to one of Washington's most prestigious addresses, a property in the heart of the city that is surrounded by powerful political figures and foreign embassies. How surrounded? In May, White House counselor Kellyanne Conway and her family purchased the home next door for $7.7 million. Vernon Jordan, on the other hand, a close advisor to President Bill Clinton, lives across the street. But imagine that story. We read the story of Kellyanne Conway and her husband, who also has a government job, buying their new house in Washington. Now, Kellyanne Conway, when she didn't live in Washington, she lived where? She lived in New York. Where in New York? Trump World Tower. She lived in a Trump property. But now buying down in D.C., he doesn't have Trump properties for sale to her. He's not selling condo units in the Trump International Hotel at this point, though that may be something in the offing in the future. And we read about the house that she bought and how overpriced it was, yada, yada. But yeah, at the time, don't you think it would have put a little different twist on the story? Not that they were withholding the information or anything. They didn't know it yet. But it would have put a different twist on the story if we said, oh, yeah, and by the way, she bought the house next door to Oleg Deripaska. Did you know? We didn't, but now we do. Several people familiar with the mansion told the Washington Post that Deripaska was known to them as the property's owner. Dang it, we missed that. He directed major renovations and has visited the house several times since 2010, which is an interesting thing for the guy who owns it to do. Anyway, a New York-based company called Gracetown that oversees the property is run by a business associate of Deripaska's. Corporate filings show the stone edifice, ringed with security cameras, is located on less than an acre behind a high gate on a winding street near Embassy Row. It is less than half a mile from the Naval Observatory, the home of Vice President Pence, and about a mile from the Russian embassy. Some of the city's most prominent figures live just on the other side of Rock Creek, including former President Barack Obama and Trump's daughter and son-in-law, whatever their names are. White House aides, oh yes, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. Charles Davidson, executive director of the Kleptocracy Initiative, in the Hudson Institute. They're not supposed to be pro-kleptocracy, but one, I have my doubts, and two, the name doesn't really help. Anyway, Charles says, the mansion is a striking example of how the world's uber wealthy can quietly invest in high-end real estate, obscuring their identities through front companies. This could be the most spectacular example of it yet. Right in our midst, he said. Lawyers for Deripaska in New York and London and his spokeswoman in Moscow did not respond to requests for comment. With a net worth recently estimated by Forbes at $5.2 billion. Only $5.2 billion, please, come on. Deripaska, 49, is one of Russia's richest men and considered part of Putin's inner circle. A U.S. diplomatic cable from 2006, published by WikiLeaks, interestingly enough, referred to Deripaska as among the 2 to 3 oligarchs Putin turns to on a regular basis. News photographers captured images of Deripaska conferring with Putin earlier this month, as a matter of fact, during trade meetings in Vietnam that were also attended by, President Kukla, Donald Trump, the no puppet guy. Deripaska is known to own a luxury yacht, a private plane, and has held property in various cities such as Tokyo and London, according to news reports. Of course, we heard about him in all the money laundering stories related to Trump in the past. But he has fought to keep secret details of his assets in the United States. In a pending lawsuit in New York related to another Russian-born businessman's claim that Deripaska owes him money, Deripaska has argued that his contact with the United States is too minimal for the state's courts to be able to assert jurisdiction over him. His lawyers successfully argued that hundreds of pages of documents that detail his business and his footprints in this country should be kept under seal, asserting they contain no information that is of public interest or concern. Nothing to see here. However, public portions of his filings show that Deripaska said that he established a trust in the British Virgin Islands that purchased 2 homes in Manhattan, a $4.5 million townhouse in the West Village in 2006, and a different $42.5 million house on the Upper East Side in 2008. Each was purchased by separate companies controlled by the billionaire. I have my contacts with this country are so minimal. I have 19 houses. By the way, a $4.5 million townhouse in the West Village, purchased in 2006. I don't know anything about it. I don't know what the address is. I don't know where it is. I don't know if he knew Donald Trump at the time. But here's what came to mind. That's a townhouse in the Village is where Trump stashed his underage teenage Russian models during that period of time. And so I just have some questions. I'm sure it'll all clear itself up. They're totally different parts of the Village, totally different addresses. He had nothing to do with it. Trump owned the property free and clear. Who knows? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I bet, on the other hand, it was probably controlled by a corporation. Who knows whether Oleg Deripaska or any other Russian oligarch had a hand in any of that? We would have to look separately. I'm just saying it raises such questions, and it would be irresponsible not to address those questions on the air. The Haft home was not mentioned in the public court documents, by the way. DC property records show it was purchased in 2006 by yet another entity, a limited liability company. Ding, I got that right. Incorporated that year in Delaware, called Hestia International, named for the Greek goddess of home and hearth, and money laundering through real estate, I guess. The seller was Myrna Rubin Haft, whose marriage to discount retail magnate, another magnate. These two magnates attracted one another. How interesting is that? Herbert Haft, 2 weeks before his 2004 death, it sparked headlines and legal action by his children. She had put the home on the market for $20 million. In an interview, Haft said she did not know the identity of the buyer and had simply been thankful at the time that the sale was conducted quickly and discreetly. The whole process was done very confidentially, she said. A man who answered the buzzer at the house's gate last week referred questions about the property to a New York company called Gracetown Incorporated. A SUV parked in the home's driveway was registered to Gracetown, public records show. According to New York corporate records, Gracetown's chief executive is a Graham Bonham Carter. Yes, second cousin to the actress Helena Bonham Carter. He lives in London, but his car is there. According to his, he's the CEO. Okay, fine. According to his LinkedIn profile, anyway, he lives in London, works for a company called Terra Services, which British regulatory filings show is owned by Oleg Deripaska. Da, 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 da. Thank you for playing. We're going to play ourselves off. It's amazing. He's Gracetown's chief executive. Chief executive. Where do you work? Not Gracetown. I work at Terra Services. Really? How interesting is that? So, I mean, what is Gracetown? Obviously, it's just some kind of shell, but it owns cars, it owns mansions. The CEO of Gracetown is Helena Bonham Carter's second cousin, who actually lives and works in London. And if you ask him what he does for a living, he says, I work for Terra Services. Interesting. You're the CEO of Gracetown. Oh, yeah, right, whatever. Yeah, that thing. Okay, whatever. He did not respond to requests for comment sent through Facebook and LinkedIn. No surprise there. People who have seen the mansion since 2006, and that's 11 years ago, since the 2006 sale, said the interior has been largely gutted and refurbished. Okay, that happens. DC construction permits show that the kitchen was remodeled. Mine too. And some of the house's 11 and a half bathrooms, I don't have that many, were overhauled in the last decade. Gold toilets. In addition, the basement was redone, a rear terrace was constructed, and a new pool and elevator were installed. Okay. The mansion includes a cinema in the basement, a commercial-grade kitchen, and a dining room that seats 16. Deripaska got his start in the aluminum business, which I'm sure was great in getting good prices on the brushed aluminum upgraded commercial kitchen as well. Thriving in the Wild West days of 1990s post-Soviet capitalism, since then he has expanded his business empire into energy, agriculture, and aviation, and presidents of the United States. He has been also a business associate of Paul Manafort's, paying the U.S. political operative to serve as an investment consultant, because he's all about investments, you see, after Manafort began work as a consultant in Ukraine in 2005. What would he know about investments? He's a political consultant. I don't know. In 2014, Deripaska filed suit in the Cayman Islands, alleging that Manafort had disappeared after taking nearly $19 million intended for investments and failing to account for the funds. That's why you don't hire you're a good dentist, but should you be my investment counselor? I don't know. I said to Orly Tates. I mean, duh. Anyway, it's not clear how that dispute was settled, but last year, while serving on Trump's campaign, Manafort wrote emails to a Russian former employee indicating he would be willing to conduct private briefings about the campaign for Deripaska, who probably could have said, kiss my ass. I live next door to Kellyanne Conway. I'll get all the briefings I want. Manafort's spokesman said the emails were an innocuous effort to collect past debts, but it's actually backwards. And Deripaska's spokeswoman said he never got the message and received no briefings. Deripaska has denied any involvement in the U.S. presidential elections, but so what? His lawyers said in a court document he's been generally barred from visiting the United States, where he owns 100 homes, for some strange reason, because the U.S. government has refused to extend him visas, meaning he has not been able to visit his Washington home at will, or for that matter, his New York homes, even though people say they keep seeing him there. That's so weird. The Wall Street Journal reported that in 2007, Deripaska's visa struggles they reported in 2007 that his visa struggles stem from suspicions he has been involved in, you'll never believe it, organized crime. An allegation he has, you'll never believe it, long denied. Putin has publicly bemoaned Deripaska's visa problems. Why? Should he care? Nobody knows. And top Russian officials have routinely raised the matter in private meetings with their U.S. counterparts, according to former U.S. officials familiar with the appeals. Deripaska he did enter the United States a handful of times using a diplomatic passport issued to him by the Russian government, so he could help assist at summit meetings and other trade missions, according to documents filed in the New York case. People traveling on diplomatic visas are generally barred from conducting personal business, said David Leopold, a former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. But of course, if your LLCs are conducting the business, I guess it's okay. Deripaska said in a 2016 court filing that he has had difficulty getting a visa to travel to the United States, but used his diplomatic passport to visit New York 10 times since 2009. So he can visit his apartments after all. People familiar with the D.C. home said that on one of those trips he also visited Washington, staying at the house and reviewing renovations, which sounds an awful lot like personal business. It is unclear when Deripaska most recently visited and whether any of his neighbors know of his tie to the property. They do now. Conway did not respond to requests for comment, but who cares? She would just lie anyway. Jordan, a Washington lawyer who was a close friend of Bill Clinton and lives across the street from the mansion, said he did not know who owned the home. I get to look at it when I'm turning onto my street, he said. Nobody's ever there. It seems like it's abandoned, but they do a good job with the trees and shrubbery. And that's really basically all he's going to care about with respect to this lovely home, just that it stay lovely and not ruin his property value. And what else could he possibly be thinking about with that? It's a weird story, and it's just so strange that she would move in next door, or he would move in next door to Kellyanne Conway, or rather that Kellyanne Conway would move in next door to him. But he's hardly ever there, so maybe there's nothing to it. It's just a weird story and nothing more. All right. So up at the top of the story or the top of the show today, I mentioned Jonathan Chait's story. It's as good as anything to end with today, since there's nothing that can really put a capper on what's going on this morning. That was the piece that he had titled, New Reports Suggest Trump Might Not Be a Liar at All, but Truly Delusional. Might as well remind ourselves what that's all about and nod our heads in agreement as we exit from today's show. The prevailing interpretation of Donald Trump, shared by all his enemies and many of his allies, is that he is a con man. It is a theory that explains both his career, whatever you might want to call it, in business and politics, and has carried through his many reversals of position and acts of fraud against customers and contractors. It remains quite plausible, but new reporting has opened up a second possibility: the president has lost all touch with reality. What reporting are we talking about? The Washington Post and New York Times have accounts from insiders suggesting Trump habitually insists upon the impossible in private. Not like I'm striving for this impossible standard of service to my hotel guests. No, this sort of impossible. He does not merely tell lies in order to gull the public or to manipulate allies. He tells lies in private that he has no reason to tell. He, for instance, still questions the authenticity of Barack Obama's birthplace despite the birth certificate and, of course, his public supposedly disavowal of birtherism. He insists voter fraud may have denied him the popular vote triumph. He tells people Robert Mueller will wrap up his investigation with a total vindication of the president by the end of the year. He questions whether the Access Hollywood tape on which he was recorded boasting of sexual assault is even him. Both the Post and the Times report Trump repeatedly has denied the validity of the tape in private, stunning his advisors, as the Times puts it. It is, of course, entirely possible that Trump is lying to everybody, including his own staff. But the lies in these articles do not always fit into any pattern of rational, maybe that's the problem, self-aggrandizement. Trump tells senators or his aides the Access Hollywood tape is not him, but they don't believe him, and I don't see why anybody would bother doing that. He has no reason to bring up the birther fabrication in private. That's true. I mean, most of his people probably believe it too. His apparent belief that Mueller will complete his sprawling investigation by the end of the year is not only pointless, but self-defeating. Rather than prepare allies for a long defense, he's preparing them for a fantastical scenario. It is also further evidence that when Mueller fails to vindicate him by the new year, Trump will lash out wildly, firing him, Jeff Sessions, or maybe others. If Trump actually has the ability to convince himself of his own lies, it would suggest a possibility far more dangerous than even his critics have previously assumed. Well, some of his critics, I guess, anyway, where you live, Jonathan. He might be in the grip of a mental health issue. Yeah, he might be. Or at least one more serious than mere sociopathy. And the mutterings that he might need to be removed from office through the 25th Amendment could grow more serious than many of us had expected. Well, it would be a welcome change, but I don't know. Well, don't hold your breath, certainly. Do continue breathing throughout this process. I don't recommend approaching it any other way. Let's see. Oh, let's throw in one more thing here. We do have a few minutes. We might be able to get through the bulk of this. She can sometimes be contrite with these sorts of things. Empty Wheel. Marcy Wheeler has this entry that I just thought we ought to take note of at her blog, The Seychelles Meeting. Remember that one? Inches Kushner closer to quid pro quo with sanctioned Russian money. Okay, can we get through the basics of this one? The Intercept has an article that has gotten surprisingly little attention, particularly given the reports that Mike Flynn is preparing to flip on Trump and that the House Intelligence Committee will have Eric Prince testify in its investigation. It reveals that the previously unknown identity of a Russian that Eric Prince met in the Seychelles in January is the CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund. So here's the clip from The Intercept here. The identity of the Russian individual was not disclosed, but on January 11th, a Turkish-owned Bombardier Global 5000 charter plane flew Kirill Dmitriev. I don't think we've gotten that name before. CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund to the Seychelles. Flight records obtained by The Intercept show Dmitriev's plane was an unscheduled charter flight and flew to the island with two other Russian individuals, both women. The RDIF, the Russian Direct Investment Fund, is a $10 billion sovereign wealth fund created by the Russian government in 2011. Further, although Prince repeatedly stated he couldn't remember the Russian's name, we didn't exchange cards, he said. A spokesperson for Frontier Services Group confirmed to The Intercept in September that Prince crossed paths with Dmitriev in the Seychelles. The article goes on to note that the RDIF separated from its parent company, Vnesh Bank, remember them, in 2016. Why? To evade sanctions. Again, the clip from The Intercept. While it is legal to do business with RDIF in certain circumstances, there are several nuanced restrictions that, if ignored or overlooked, can easily lead to a violation. The resulting uncertainty has created opportunities for companies and individuals to find loopholes and bypass sanctions. Analysts say RDIF attempted to do this in 2016 when the fund distanced itself from its parent company, the Russian bank Bank, or VEB, which is also subject to U.S. sanctions. Legislation signed by Putin in 2016 enabled RDIF to transfer its management company, known as the RDIF Management Company, LLC, to the Russian Federal Agency for State Property Management. Sadly, Marcy begins her conclusion, the Intercept article doesn't lay out the timeline this creates. So here she does it. Early December, Flynn and Kushner meet with Sergei Kislyak. Later December, at the behest of Kislyak, Kushner meets with Vnesh Bank's Sergei Gorkov. And also in December, Mohammed bin Zayed holds undisclosed meeting in New York with Kushner and Steve Bannon. December 29th, Flynn tells Kislyak Trump will ease sanctions. And then on into this year as we play our outro music. January 11th, at the behest of Mohammed bin Zayed, Eric Prince meets with Dmitriev. And January 17th, Anthony Scaramucci, remember that guy? Meets with RDIF in Davos. Well, there's lots to contemplate in that, and of course lots to link. If you didn't catch all the references, as is often sometimes the case as Marcy speaks in shorthand, don't worry, we'll give you the link, and you can go and follow all of her links in her timeline, and you and me both will awaken to the extraordinary implications of all this. We would ordinarily have given that more time, but so many extraordinary things were happening today. Well, I just wanted you to have that one in pocket before that one gets out of hand. I recommend checking up on it this afternoon if you can. Meanwhile, if you're looking for more news about all the other crazy things that happened, or a different perspective on some of these crazy things, you should stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy following this show every day here, Monday through Friday, serving up a cornucopia of abundance in several of his attractively named segments. Front Cafe, The Shelf's Table, all of which include the following stories. Sebastian Gorka keeps getting jobs despite his Nazi connections. Trump's FCC chairman says Twitter banning Nazis is an attack on the conservative movement, and more after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
I told you we weren't done with James O'Keefe, and on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, they'll be looking at the secret donors behind James O'Keefe, now exposed. And they'll be moving into their Chef's Table segment for a discussion on federal prosecutors arguing for the right to call Trump inauguration protesters Antifa, and much, much more.